World is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION. World is one.
Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching WION World is One. This is World DNA, the show that gets you ahead of the rest. I'm Shubin Chandna.
And I'm Hem Kaur, and on the show today, Pope Francis dies of a stroke and irreversible heart failure. The Vatican has released the death certificate of the late pontiff. We will be bringing you all the updates on that on the show today.
Also on World DNA, we bring you details. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US Vice President J.D. Vance welcomed the significant progress in the negotiations for a US-India bilateral trade agreement as they met in New Delhi. We bring you the details of that meet. This and a lot more lined up for you. Let's start with the headlines.
Pope Francis died of a stroke and irreversible heart failure. As per the Vatican doctor in his death certificate, the Pope had fallen into a coma before his death.
From Italy to Argentina, prayers held around the world to pay tribute to Pope Francis.
Donald Trump says him and First Lady Melania Trump would attend the Pope's funeral, orders state and federal flags around the country to fly at half-staff.
Harvard sues US government to block President Donald Trump from freezing billions of dollars in federal funding to the university.
US Vice President J.D. Vance meets Prime Minister Narendra Modi in New Delhi. Both leaders welcome significant progress in the negotiations for a bilateral trade deal.
President Trump warns of a potential US economic slowdown unless the Federal Reserve slashes interest rates immediately. Concerns also deepen after reports that the White House is exploring options to remove Powell.
Leeds United and Burnley earn automatic promotion to the English Premier League. They will now go head-to-head for the championship title.
Pope Francis died of a stroke and irreversible heart failure. The Vatican has now released the death certificate of the late pontiff.
Now, as per the Vatican, the 88-year-old leader of the Roman Catholic Church had fallen into a coma before his death on Monday morning. This certificate published by the Vatican reads, and I'm quoting here, "I certify that His Holiness Francis, born in Buenos Aires on December 17, 1936, residing in the Vatican City, a Vatican citizen, passed away at 7:35 a.m. on the 21st of April 2025 in his apartment at the Vatican City due to cerebral stroke, coma, irreversible cardiocirculatory collapse."
Pope Francis has left detailed instructions for his funeral in his will. According to the Vatican, the pontiff's final wishes include being buried in the Basilica of St. Mary Major in Rome, a site he frequently visited during his papacy.
He had asked that his tomb be prepared in the burial niche of the side of the nave between Pauline Chapel and the Sforza Chapel of the Basilica. He has requested the tomb be in the earth with simple, without special decoration, bearing only the inscription Franciscus. He will be the first pope to be buried outside the Vatican in more than a century. The last pope to be buried outside the Vatican was Leo XIII, who died in 1903.
Now, the funeral is expected to take place between Friday, that is April 25th, and Sunday, April 27th, with a group of cardinals scheduled to meet today to potentially finalize the date. The Vatican has confirmed that Cardinal Kevin Farrell will oversee the formal rites, including the certification of death and the placement of the Pope's body in a coffin.
Pope Francis, the first Latin American pope and a transformative figure in the modern Catholic Church, had suffered from double pneumonia earlier this year. His death has come as a shock following his appearance in St. Peter's Square on Easter Sunday, where he greeted crowds from an open-air Pope-mobile.
The US President has announced that he would attend the funeral of Pope Francis in Rome with First Lady Melania Trump. The late pontiff was a staunch critic of Trump's anti-immigrant policies, and faithful and Argentine authorities gathered to pay tribute to Pope Francis in Buenos Aires, a church where the pontiff grew up and was educated in the Catholic faith. The Archbishop of Buenos Aires, Jorge Garcia, served the Mass for the dozens who attended the San Jose de Flores Basilica, including the Argentine Vice President Victoria. Garcia recalled Francis' determination not to hide from current problems and called on Argentines to come together in times of division.
No le pregunto, pero la guerra empieza en el propio corazón y de eso.
Now, of course, tributes have been pouring in from across the globe for Pope Francis, who breathed his last at the age of 88.
The Vatican has issued a statement that public prayer for Pope Francis will be held at St. Peter's and that the cause of death is likely to be shared later. As Vatican City observes the cause of death, of course, the Vatican has already shared. They are going to be observing a 9-day mourning period for Pope Francis. The pontiff's demise sets in motion a series of rites that will culminate in the gathering of cardinals to choose a successor.
The Catholic Church now begins one of its most sacred and closely watched traditions, the election of a new pope. Let's now take a look at this ancient process that is steeped in ritual secrecy and global attention.
The death of Pope Francis in motion centuries-old traditions, which will culminate in the election by cardinals of a new pontiff who would lead 1.4 billion Catholics around the world. The election of a new pontiff cannot begin until at least 15 days after the death of a pope and must start within 20 days. During this time, the College of Cardinals gather in Rome. Once the process begins, these cardinals can't have contact with the outside world.
The death of a pope initiates a centuries-old ritual to elect a new pontiff. It begins with 9 days of funeral rites, during which the pope is buried. Cardinals are coming to Rome from around the world to participate in that funeral mass, as are heads of state. Then the conclave procedures begin. There are a few days of closed meetings. These are when the cardinals get together and meet in secret.
The votes are cast in the Sistine Chapel. To be elected, a candidate must receive a 2/3 majority. After each vote, the ballots are burned. If no pope has been chosen, black smoke emerges from the chapel's chimney. If a new pope has been elected, white smoke billows out, signaling the world that the Church has a new spiritual leader. Let's now take a look at the probables to become the next pope. Cardinal John Mark Aviation, a theological thinker and reform-minded bishop of Marseille, aligned with Francis on immigration and interfaith relations. Cardinal Peter Erdo, a legal scholar with conservative roots but a pragmatic streak, fluent in multiple languages and a veteran of Vatican politics. Cardinal Mario Grech, Synod of Bishops leader, a modern reformer respected for his attempts to bring the Church into the 21st century. Cardinal Juan José Omella, compassionate and socially conscious. He is deeply pastoral but also part of Francis's inner circle. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, Vatican Secretary of State and seasoned diplomat. He may appeal to cardinals seeking a steady hand and institutional continuity. Whoever emerges will inherit a church at a crossroads, grappling with modernity, past scandals and the global challenges Francis worked to confront. Whether they pursue reform, restoration or quiet diplomacy, the next pope will shape Catholicism's future for decades to come. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Russia has launched aerial attacks at Ukraine in an abrupt end to a fragile Easter truce.
This while President Vladimir Putin has raised questions over Kyiv's offer of a month-long halt to strikes on civilian targets. Ukrainian officials reported a wave of overnight drone and artillery strikes following the 30-hour truce. Soon after, Putin said military action has resumed. The new attacks came hours after Donald Trump said a deal could be struck this week as he hopes for a broader ceasefire.
Zelensky has proposed a follow-up that would cease any strikes using long-range drones and missiles on civilian infrastructure for a period of at least 30 days. Putin says Russia will analyze the idea, but he has questioned how it would work, saying Ukraine uses civilian buildings such as restaurants and universities for military purposes.
As for the proposal not to hit civilian infrastructure, this needs to be figured out. For example, the strike by our armed forces on the Congress Center, I believe, of Sumy University, which is now well known to everyone. Is this a civilian target or not? Well, there was an award ceremony taking place there for those who committed crimes in the Kursk region.
Now, Zelensky called on Russia to give a clear answer to the ceasefire proposal. He said that Ukraine stands by its proposal for an end to attacks on civilian targets and is ready for any form of discussion to achieve it.
Ukraine maintains its proposal not to strike at least civilian infrastructure, and we are expecting a clear response from Moscow. We are ready for any conversation about how to achieve this. There is an obvious, simplest, and most reliable path: to stop missile and long-range drone strikes, which would automatically ensure the protection of all civilian infrastructure.
Zelensky has also said that Kiev is sending a delegation to London on Wednesday for ceasefire talks with Britain, France and the US. Zelensky added that the talks have a primary task to push for an unconditional ceasefire and that Ukraine is ready to move forward as constructively as possible.
Now, Israeli minister's bombshell comment on hostages has sparked outrage in the country.
We're talking about Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who is facing backlash for saying rescuing hostages from Gaza is not the most important thing. Now, Smotrich made that comment while speaking to Radio Gali. In his remarks, Finance Minister put wiping out Hamas above rescuing the remaining hostages from Gaza as their main objective. Now, the statement immediately drew backlash from the families of the hostages, human rights groups, as well as members of the ruling coalition. Hostage and Families Forum called Smotrich's remarks a shameful betrayal, accusing Israeli government of deliberately giving up on the remaining hostages.
The Israeli government is facing strong questions over its Gaza operations as well.
The IDF has admitted operational error in killing 15 medics in Gaza. Israeli government spokesman said that killing of the medics was a tragic and undesired result of a complex operational situation. The International Red Cross called it the deadliest attack on its personnel in 8 years.
Meanwhile, Washington continues to make efforts to broker a ceasefire deal between Hamas and Israel. New U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, has urged Hamas to accept a deal that would free hostages in exchange for humanitarian aid into the war-torn strip.
Hamas is still holding 59 hostages. Out of those, 24 are believed to be still alive. With negotiations stuck, pressure is mounting on the Israeli government to prioritize hostage release. And Israel's internal security chief Ronen Bar has accused the Israeli Prime Minister of demanding personal loyalty and ordering him to spy on anti-government protesters in Israel.
Now, in his affidavit submitted to the court, Bar said that he will soon announce the date of his resignation. This affidavit, released by the Attorney General's office, contains several accusations against Netanyahu, including claims that the Israeli Prime Minister fired him for refusing to pledge his loyalty to him over the courts.
The Shin Bet chief wrote it was clear that in the event of a potential constitutional crisis, Netanyahu expected Bar to obey him and not the courts. The security agency boss also said Netanyahu told him on more than one occasion that he expected the Shin Bet to take action against Israelis involved in anti-government protests, with a particular focus on monitoring the protests' financial backers. Bar also said Netanyahu had sought his help to delay testifying in an ongoing corruption trial against him. The Shin Bet chief also provided the court with classified details regarding the Qatar Gate scandal, where ties between Netanyahu's aides and Qatar are currently being investigated.
Additionally, Ronen Bar denied accusations by Netanyahu and his associates that the Shin Bet had failed to warn in time about Hamas's October 7, 2023 attack. Netanyahu's office rejected Bar's submission as a false statement.
He also denied that he requested to delay his trial. Bar was fired on the 21st of March at Netanyahu's recommendation, but his dismissal was frozen by the court after massive protests. Meanwhile, according to a poll by the Kan public broadcaster, a majority of the Israeli public continues to differ with Prime Minister Netanyahu in supporting an end to the war in exchange for the release of all remaining hostages. Asked whether they back such a deal, 56% of the 602 respondents said they do. 22% of them said they do not, and 22% said they don't know.
Furthermore, demonstrators, including former Israeli observer soldiers, joined relatives of the Angrist, an Israeli soldier hostage being held in Gaza in Tel Aviv on Monday for protests mimicking the conditions of hostages held in Gaza. The demonstrators were covered in chains and red paint symbolizing blood to call for an end to the war and the release of all hostages.
My son was kidnapped from Nahal Oz. He was defending this country, and this country is obligated to defend him, to bring him back. He's badly injured from 7 October, and after that is tortured. Is investigating in hard violence, and they came here to say that first of all he has to come back home.
Now, Donald Trump is standing behind his Pentagon chief Pete Hegseth despite a new scandal.
Trump's backing comes amid growing calls to fire the U.S. Defense Secretary over his reported use of messaging app Signal to discuss strikes on Yemen with his wife and others. Even a Republican lawmaker has now supported calls for Hegseth's removal.
Representative Don Bacon of Nebraska told Axios that if the reports are true, the Secretary of Defense has failed at operational security, and that, of course, is unacceptable. He added that if a Democrat did this, we'd be demanding a scalp. Bacon is the chair of House Armed Services Subcommittee.
But Trump dismissed all such calls, saying that the Defense Secretary is doing a great job. He said that the reports about Hegseth's Signal use and allegations of dysfunction at the Pentagon were just fake news.
Are you bringing up Signal again? I thought they gave that up 2 weeks ago.
There was a new report this weekend that he used it in a separate chat that included some family members.
It's all just the same old stuff from the media. That's an old one. Try finding something new.
Hegseth was also defiant, blaming the media, with the White House also pushing back on another media report that aides are eyeing replacements for him.
You know, what a big surprise that a few leakers get fired and suddenly a bunch of hit pieces come out from the same media that peddled the Russia hoax. Won't give back their Pulitzers. They got Pulitzers for a bunch of lies. Pulitzers for a bunch of lies and on hoaxes, time and time and time again. And as they peddle those lies, no one ever calls them on it. See, this is what the media does. They take anonymous sources from disgruntled former employees, and then they try to slash and burn people and ruin their reputations. Not going to work with me.
Now, for more on this, a correspondent Susan Tehrani has sent us this report from New York. Listen to this.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is under scrutiny once again for allegedly sharing sensitive military information via the Signal messaging app. Reports indicated that Hegseth disclosed details about a U.S. airstrike in Yemen in two separate Signal chats. You may remember the one involving top officials. Now there's a new one. It's being reported that his wife and his brother were also on a chat, a separate one. Critics argue that this could compromise national security, leading to calls for his resignation. However, Hegseth has dismissed these allegations and claims as being quote unquote fake news, attributing them to disgruntled former employees. President Donald Trump has publicly defended his defense secretary, stating that he's doing a quote great job and labeling the reports also as being fake news. The situation has intensified debates over the handling of classified information and the use of unsecured communication channels by high-ranking officials. President Trump was asked by reporters on Monday how Hegseth was doing. He replied, "Ask the Houthis." Susan Tehrani reporting from New York for WION World is One.
A Delta plane engine caught fire on the tarmac at Orlando International Airport, forcing passengers to evacuate via emergency slides.
Now, according to the Federal Aviation Administration, the Delta Airlines flight 1213 bound for Atlanta was pushing back from the gate for departure when one of its engines caught fire. According to Delta, the Airbus plane had 282 passengers and 12 crew members on board, and there were no initial reports of injuries. The engine fire, marks the latest aviation scare involving Delta Airlines in recent months.
There's obviously people on that plane. There's never not anyone on a plane.
In February, a Delta plane had flipped upside down while landing at the Toronto Pearson Airport in Canada's Ontario. In January, a Delta flight had aborted its takeoff at Atlanta International Airport, forcing passengers to evacuate via emergency slide. These high-profile aviation incidents have raised questions about U.S. aviation safety. In January, mid-air collision of an American Airlines jet and an Army helicopter near Reagan, Washington National Airport had killed 67 people. At the same airport, two American airlines experienced a minor collision as they clipped wings earlier this month.
Now, an unlikely item is at the center of a growing smuggling operation at the US-Mexico border. And it's eggs that we're talking about.
Eggs have become the latest hot item in America's underground smuggling scene. Now, US Customs and Border Protection is in fact cracking down, seizing thousands of illegal egg shipments at the southern border. The soaring prices is the reason, and along with that, empty shelves here at home in the US, driven by record inflation and a wave of avian flu outbreaks. In some US cities, a dozen eggs have now cost nearly $10. But just across the border in Mexico, the same carton goes for a fraction of the price, which is just about $2. And that staggering price gap is sending some shoppers south and landing others in legal hot water.
Officials say egg smuggling has surged, with border seizures spiking more than 150% in cities like San Diego. People have been caught hiding eggs under blankets, stuffing them in spare tires, even disguising them as groceries. Some claim they did not know it was illegal. Others admit that they are taking the risk to save or make a quick buck.
The US is grappling with a major egg crisis due to the outbreak of the avian flu, which has wiped out nearly 170 million birds since early 2022. In February, egg prices shot up by 53.6% before cooling down a bit in March, but the shortage continues to fuel food inflation. The Trump administration in February also announced a $1 billion package to lower egg prices and help farmers to prevent further outbreak of the virus and research vaccine options. And for the first time in more than a century, life expectancy has stopped increasing in Britain.
For many communities, it is falling even. UK's Barrow Island, a neighbourhood on the western edge of Barrow-in-Furness, at once seemed full of potential. However, now it is struggling in terms of income and educational attainment. Heroin abuse has been a problem and economic inactivity remains high.
Barrow Island is an extreme case. It is in the worst 0.5% of areas for male life expectancy in the UK, but it is part of a national trend. Male life expectancy here is 71 years and is at par with war-torn Syria. But what exactly is life expectancy? Let's decode that first for you. Life expectancy is the average number of years a person is expected to live. It's a statistical estimate based on current mortality rates and can vary significantly by location, sex, age and other factors. Remarkable advancements in medicine, public health and living standards has in fact broken the predictions of limit of life expectancy now.
Life expectancy in England is significantly lower for people living in more deprived areas than for people living in less deprived areas. Reports suggest socio-economic inequalities in health in England have been widening since 2010. By 2019, life expectancy at birth in England had increased to 79.8 years. For males, it was 83.5 years. For it was 83.5 years for females. However, the COVID-19 pandemic caused life expectancy in 2020 to fall sharply. Although life expectancy recovered partially, thereafter in 2022, it remained below the 2019 pre-pandemic level. And with that, it's time now for a short break.
Don't go anywhere. This is World DNA. Him and I will be back with you on the other side of the break. When we come back, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US Vice President JD Vance, they met in New Delhi. Both leaders welcomed the progress in the negotiations for a US-India bilateral trade deal. We'll bring you the details.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi will embark on a two-day visit to Saudi Arabia today, following an invitation from Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman.
Catch me on Token Money Magnet as I demystify tokenization for you, only on WION.
In a move to slash federal funding, the Trump administration plans to shut embassies in 8 African countries, including the Central African Republic, Congo, Eritrea, Gambia, Lesotho, and South Sudan. Somalia launches voter registration in the capital Mogadishu for the first time in over 50 years, a step towards universal suffrage ahead of presidential elections scheduled for 2026 in the volatile nation. And an autistic Nigerian teen artist wins the Guinness World Records for the largest artwork on canvas by an individual. Watch World of Africa at these times on WION World is One.
To bring the benefits of the Subhash Chandra Show to your educational institution, teachers and students, send an invitation to Juhi Jha at juhi@such.org.in.
Welcome back, viewers. You're watching World DNA with him, and I'm Shivan. Lots more to discuss. Let's start with the headlines.
FBI Chief Kash Patel says justice will be done in the case of Harpreet Singh, arrested in the United States. Singh is accused of planning multiple attacks on police stations in India and the United States.
US Vice President J.D. Vance meets Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in New Delhi. Both leaders welcome significant progress in the negotiations for a bilateral trade deal.
Pope Francis died of a stroke and irreversible heart failure, says the Vatican doctor in his death certificate. The Pope had fallen into a coma before his death.
The College of Cardinals expected to gather to choose Pope Francis' successor in 2 weeks. Around 135 cardinals, including 21 who were added by Pope Francis in December, to cast their votes for a new pope.
Harvard sues U.S. government to block President Donald Trump from freezing billions of dollars in federal funding to the university.
Gaza's civil defense agency says at least 7 people killed in fresh Israeli airstrikes across the enclave. Strikes hit Beit Lahiya, Beit Hanun and Khan Yunis.
The U.S. leading economic index falls 0.7% in March. This signals weaker growth prospects amid rising economic uncertainty tied to tariffs. Key drags include declining consumer expectations, stock prices, and manufacturing orders.
Leeds United and Burnley earn automatic promotion to the English Premier League. They will now go head-to-head for the championship title.
Now, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US Vice President J.D. Vance welcomed the significant progress in the negotiations for a US-India bilateral trade agreement as they met in New Delhi.
Vance is on a 4-day visit to India. He's accompanied by his family. He has arrived in New Delhi yesterday. On Monday, the Indian Prime Minister hosted the Vances at his residence in the Indian capital. The evening witnessed Prime Minister Modi and US Vice President Vance formally announce the finalization of the terms of reference for negotiations for the bilateral trade agreement, laying down a roadmap for further discussions about shared economic priorities. The two leaders also noted continued efforts to enhance cooperation in energy, defense, strategic technologies and other areas. Prime Minister Modi and Donald Trump's deputy also exchanged views on various regional and global issues of mutual interest and called for dialogue and diplomacy as the way forward, as what India has always said.
Now, during the visit to Prime Minister Modi's residence, the US Vice President was accompanied by Second Lady Usha Vance and their 3 children. In a video released later, Prime Minister Modi can be seen embracing JD Vance, interacting with Usha Vance and their children, gifting a peacock feather each to Ewan, Vivek and Mirabel.
In a statement, the Vice President extended his gratitude to the Indian Prime Minister for being such a gracious host. He called Prime Minister Modi a great leader. Modi wished the Vances a pleasant and productive stay in India. JD Vance and family took a flight to Jaipur later in the day, and they're staying at Hotel Rambagh Palace. The Vances will be visiting the Amber Fort today. Also, the US Vice President will deliver a lecture on US-India relations at Rajasthan International Centre. Early the next day, Vance will, with his wife and children, will leave for Agra, where they will be visiting Taj Mahal.
And for more on this, the correspondent Susan Tehrani has sent us this report from New York. Listen to this.
U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance met with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Delhi, marking a key moment in U.S.-India relations under the Trump administration. Vance was joined by Second Lady Usha Vance, their children and senior officials, announcing progress on a U.S.-India bilateral trade agreement, with both sides finalizing framework for talks aimed at boosting job creation and deepening supply chain integration. Now, the deal aligns with Vance's Golden Age of America agenda and Modi's Amrit Kaal vision. The visit is building on President Donald Trump's recent summit with Prime Minister Modi. They launched the Compact initiative focused on defense, trade, and tech. Vance also participated in cultural engagement and business roundtables during his India trip. More to come, of course. Susan Tehrani reporting from New York for WION World is One.
Now, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi will embark on a 2-day visit to Saudi Arabia today.
And this is following an invitation from Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman himself. And this would be Modi's 3rd visit to Saudi Arabia and the first in his 3rd term.
Now, this visit will be hosted in the city of Jeddah, marking the first visit by an Indian leader to Saudi Arabia's commercial hub in over 4 decades. Prime Minister Modi's engagements will include a ceremonial welcome by the Crown Prince. The two leaders will also co-chair the 2nd meeting of the Strategic Partnership Council. Ahead of the visit, Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri said that the two sides would also discuss several global developments, including the attacks by Houthis in the Red Sea and the conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza.
Key issues on India's agenda include trade and investments, energy cooperation, defense partnership, and reviving the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor (IMEC). Tensions in West Asia have impacted the ambitious India-Middle East Economic Corridor, which aims to connect India to Europe through West Asia. Now, Saudi Arabia is a key strategic partner for India in West Asia. In the year 2023-24, it was the 3rd largest crude and petroleum sourcing destination for India, accounting for 14.3% of the country's total crude oil imports. Saudi Arabia is also India's 5th largest trading partner, with bilateral trade between the two countries standing at $42.98 billion. Pope Francis, the charismatic Argentine pontiff who redefined the modern papacy, died at the age of 88.
Known as the People's Pope, Pope Francis leaves behind a transformed Catholic Church, more compassionate and engaged with contemporary issues, yet still anchored in its ancient traditions. Take a look.
Shock, sorrow, and reverence The world reels as Pope Francis, the people's Pope, breathed his last. His death marks the end of a papacy that shattered conventions, upended tradition, and left the Catholic Church forever changed.
Fratelli e sorelle, vi lascio grazie tante dell'accoglienza. Pregate per me.
Elected in 2013, he became the first pope from the Americas and the Southern Hemisphere. From the beginning, he made clear that his was a mission of proximity, not privilege. My people are poor, and I am one of them, he once said. The 266th Pope refused the palatial apostolic apartments, choosing instead to live in a modest Vatican guest house. Before becoming Pope, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, born in Argentina to Italian immigrants, he worked various jobs, including a nightclub bouncer.
We feel enormous sadness. He was a pope who was very committed to the poor, to those in need. He was humble. He will be greatly missed.
The Argentinian pontiff ushered in a swathe of reforms over his 12-year papacy. Under his leadership, the Vatican underwent financial reforms, including the conviction of one of his own top aides, Cardinal Angelo Becciu, in a major financial scandal. His legislative impact was vast. He rewrote the Vatican Constitution and reshaped its legal system. For the late Pope Francis, love for humanity transcended religion. He visited refugees, kissed the feet of prisoners, and prayed at mosques and synagogues. 3 years ago, on a visit to Canada, he apologized to the indigenous people for how they were wronged at residential schools. Pope also appointed the first female Undersecretary of the Synod of Bishops, starting a seismic shift in a church long paralyzed by patriarchy.
It's a great disappointment, a great loss, a man who has innovated the church and a man who has left a great mark. And this, his absence, causes great pain.
If I had to describe Pope Francis, the most important thing would be his work for the unity of the Church, his fraternity and humility. A man that was very close to the young people, a very sensible man in his words.
Francis denounced indifference shown to migrants and kept urging Europe and other countries to open their doors to those seeking better lives. The pontiff was outspoken about Israel's military campaign in Gaza, calling the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip very serious and shameful. From the bloodshed in Ukraine war to climate change, the Pope never minced his words.
Pope Francis was history's first Latin American pope. He was history's first Jesuit pope. And he was the first one to name himself after St. Francis of Assisi. That Franciscan friar was a real lover of nature, and that message really came through in the emphasis that Pope Francis placed on caring for the environment. He made climate change and the need to combat it a real hallmark of his papacy. He wrote an entire encyclical about the environment.
He remained hospitalized for 5 weeks, suffering from severe double pneumonia. This was his last public appearance on Easter Sunday, blessing the faithful at Vatican's St. Peter's Square.
Cari fratelli e sorelle, buona Pasqua.
Francis's desire to chart a different path was evident right to the end. With his decision to be buried not at St. Peter's Basilica, but in Rome's Santa Maria Maggiore Basilica. He will become the first pope in more than 100 years to be laid to rest outside the Vatican.
Now, China's increasing reliance on foreign demand is a critical weakness that was concealed by the country's stronger than expected March quarter growth.
The reason? It raises the risk of a more severe economic shock as trade tensions rise. Net exports accounted for over 40% of the 5.4% increase in March quarter GDP, the largest percentage for this period in over a decade. And that's also up from last year when trade accounted for almost a third of overall growth. The latest data is also up over the previous year when trade contributed about 1/3 of total growth. And there has never been a more risky moment for such reliance on foreign demand. The export engine that has been powering China's growth might potentially come to a standstill as a result of the US increasing tariffs on Chinese goods. And what is not helping is a general weakening of global demand as a result of President Trump's trade policies.
China has stepped up its trade battle with the US by warning other nations not to make arrangements with Washington that would harm Beijing's interests. This shows how others could find themselves caught in the middle of this dispute. The Ministry of Commerce said Beijing resolutely opposes any party reaching a deal at the expense of China's interests. That comes as the US is tightening its noose so that China does not circumvent its tariffs by using allies to sell its goods.
Separately, China's shadow banking crisis shows that the wealth wipeout is deepening amid a slowing domestic demand. Even though it's been almost a year since a major Chinese trust company went under, the $3.7 trillion sector is showing no signs of revival. According to a Bloomberg report, state-appointed custodians have recently concluded that Zhongrong International Trust is insolvent. They have submitted a winding-up proposal to regulators. The company had approximately $108 billion in assets in 2022 when the government became insolvent due to significant losses on real estate and other investments. The evaluation shows that a significant part of China's shadow banking sector has been hurting for a while now, and it also confirms that Beijing isn't prepared to help out wealthy investors. The financial circus rolls into Washington this week for the IMF's spring meetings, and the ringmasters are walking a precarious tightrope here.
Tariffs take center stage, of course, but what can be done about them, and what does it mean for the global economy? As the Trump administration tries to negotiate with its trade partners, finance ministers from all over the globe will gather in Washington, D.C. this week for the spring meeting of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. However, the dimming global economic outlook will cast a shadow over any bilateral negotiations. No matter how many tariffs the US imposes, the bleak global picture will affect US trading partners.
New economic predictions and polls will indicate the initial impact 3 weeks after Trump officially initiated a trade war with the whole world. Many countries will be indirectly hit if US tariffs substantially weaken the economic prospects of their trading partners. For example, say you're Japan, one of the nations the Trump administration has prioritized in its negotiations. Its two biggest export markets are China and the US, followed by South Korea, Hong Kong, Thailand, Vietnam and Mexico. In 2023, Japan exported slightly more to those last five combined than to the US. Japanese exporters would, of course, prefer lower US tariffs, but high tariffs on China, Vietnam, Mexico and attendant dents in those economies could hurt Japan too.
All of this means that even countries optimistic about securing a trade deal with the US will be keeping an eye on the global outlook. In other words, in a tightly knit global economy, even bilateral trade fights can have ripple effects.
Expectations for global economic growth are soaring since Trump's April 2nd Liberation Day announcement. A Bank of America survey shows 82% of investors expect the global economy to weaken.
Now, Goldman Sachs expects year-over-year global GDP growth of just 1.4% in the current quarter, less than half of the 3% growth at least at the end of the year.
IMF is set to slash its own growth forecast when it publishes its World Economic Outlook later on Tuesday. Now, IMF's Managing Director, Kristalina Georgieva, said our new growth projections will include notable markdowns but not recession.
All right, on to sports now. 2017 French Open winner Jelena Ostapenko has lifted her first title of the season.
She stunned world number 1 Aryna Sabalenka in straight sets to win the Stuttgart Open. Ostapenko, who beats the likes of Iga Swiatek and Ekaterina Alexandrova on her way to the final, broke Sabalenka in the very first game to set the tone of the match. World number 1 Sabalenka, eyeing her first clay court title since the 2023 Madrid Open, fought back to level the first set at 4-all, but couldn't build on that, as Ostapenko